It will depend on the rate and efficiency of recycling. Put up some... Now, when I was talking about, or at least caps, they're achieved by limiting the number of permits. Just slowing down the economy won't be enough. We've really got to change our institutions, and the financial system is one of them, in order to make this healthy transition from the growth economy, not just slow it down, but somehow, as you know, this thing's moving along, it converts into a helicopter so it can just hover rather than move along. Now, there was this person, I think, the back. Oh, so, all right, and then you, and then sorry. Hang on.
Just first of all, using that chart,
yeah.
that message is a cautionary tale,
yeah.
and the risk in itself, because some of the feedbacks are delayed by 30 to 50 years, so the effects of what we've done in the past aren't yet shown.
No, that's true.
And the other point was that Michael raised the issue with the trading system in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think Andrew Nance, a lot of people you might know, is now working with the Department for Premier and Cabinet. He talks about one of the real issues with carbon trading in Australia is that we're going to have measuring of current emissions. They're bringing in the regulations for next financial year, so we'll have 1 year's worth of data to base the permits.
Yeah.
So a real failing in Europe was that people really overestimated everything they could to really talk up how much they were emitting. So
Oh, okay.
the number of permits emitted were based on really insufficient data. We had the same problem here.
Well, we could.
And all of a sudden, you actually saw growth in emissions in Europe during that time because people were trying to ramp up.
No, I'm sure this problem could arise here, but again, that's not really a problem of the system. No, you can't point the finger at the system and say, well, that's the problem of it's the way it's been calculated. Yeah. Well, if that's the problem, we shouldn't be looking at that. You know,
If we are going to say, right, we need to do what we can to prevent our trajectory towards a tipping point. How we do that most rapidly might be a tax is more effective now.
Yes. I perhaps should have. I don't know if that came up, and I perhaps was going to get to that. We may have to use a tax before. So with a lot of resources before we apply cap and trade system. If only because, let's say we're using a resource 50% more than we ought to, and we've introduced a cap and trade system, we set the cap at the maximum sustainable level. They could bring the economy to a halt and could be catastrophic. And most people wouldn't accept it. So your idea of a steady state economy, people would reject it straight away. So we're probably going to have to, incur a little bit more hardship in terms of our depletion of natural capital before we... So I guess the depletion and pollution tax as part of the ecological tax reform package, in a sense, is probably the best way to start off to prepare the economy and ourselves for eventual cap and trade systems and perhaps the gradual tightening of the cap and trade, of the cap over time. So we do move perhaps back towards a steady state economy. Now, that might be the case with a lot of some, like water, where we've got a real critical problem. The cap is probably necessary immediately, and I don't think it would bring the economy to a halt and collapse the economy if we did that. But in terms of timber products, we could perhaps use tax to start with before we introduce, or fisheries. I don't know. Some fish species are in more trouble than others, but so you might apply a tax, a harvest tax, or whatever for some fish species. But you may with orange roughy, I think it is in the eastern states where there's a huge problem, you might introduce a cap immediately. Now, sorry, now, the person at the back has had her hand up for 8.
I want to ask a different question. You're at Flinders Uni, are you a lone voice in talking about this? What's the situation going on? And are students getting this sort of information in their courses, or is it an optional extra?
No, well, there's not little engagement with other people. Academics on this stuff. I just work by myself in my office. I get on very well with them, but very little exchange of ideas. So most of my exchange with other academics is usually via email to people, the odd person interstate, but most people overseas. But I am teaching some of this stuff to students. The GPI stuff, the problems with GDP as a measure of sustainable wellbeing, ecological tax reform. They love it. They think it's great. Yeah. So I think, but I've got to be careful though. No, in fact, the topic that I'm teaching now, which includes the GPI, is a compulsory topic of the Bachelor of Environmental Management. But I do have to also be aware of the fact that some of these people are going to finish their degree, go for a job interview, and someone's going to say, well, what do you think we should do? And someone's going to say, I think we should introduce ecological tax reform or apply the genuine progress indicator, and they, oh, bye-bye. So, so I've got to ease the way I introduce this stuff in accordance with the way perhaps employers are thinking. It's not easy. I've got to think in terms of what I think is beneficial from an academic point of view and what might be beneficial from an employment point of view. I can't help but balance the two. So yeah, okay. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Sorry, and then, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, can I just make a political take on that
Yep.
graph?
Yep.
I find interesting, which is that, 73 GDI starts dropping.
Yeah.
I don't think it's coincidental that, 69, 73, that's when, the long downturn of profit in international capital begins. And from that point, if you want to try and increase your rate of profit, you've got to do a number of things. But one of the things that was decided on internationally was to adopt a neoliberal strategy. So you get Thatcherism, Reaganism, various forms here. So you get the destruction of, just as an example, coal mine communities in the north of England, that you get unemployment, you get the family breakdown, the mental health problems, the alcoholism, everything that goes with that. So you've got that drop of GPI.
Yeah.
And globally, ever since then, we've had a neoliberal agenda in the advanced capitalist countries. So that's I think that's one of the main reasons why the GPI has dropped. And I therefore don't think you can necessarily take it that it's some function of there's some sort of, that's an optimum point on the GDP. We could have a much more rationally community-driven society where we don't do that because we're not engaged in capitalist profit. We're using other equations and use very much GPI indicators for things.
Yes.
And that we could in fact increase the GPI quite significantly beyond that point, possibly have a higher GDP as well. But remain within the...
Why?
Because
why would we want it?
Okay, because if you're well within those sustainability, and I take the point of going on, say, 3/4 of the way, you could increase your GDP still, therefore increase your GPI even further to stay well within those limits. All I'm saying is that we shouldn't necessarily say from the empirical data that 1974, 75 point, wherever, is what we should try and set as our global GDP optimum. Because if we rearrange the way we manage things, we could push up our...
Yeah, I'm sure we can. I'm not suggesting that we should go...
Reverse this. My argument would be that if we had made the transition to a steady state economy, our per capita GPI from that mid-70s just could have kept going like this. Up, not come down. Now, I think you are right to some extent about 73, 74 being the oil price shock as well, stagflation started. But that's not where the GPI starts to fall for some countries. New Zealand, it's about early 80s. USA, it was in fact the late 60s. Some Scandinavian countries, it wasn't until the mid-80s, and so on. So it hasn't all occurred at the same point. The other thing is, we may get an increase, some little increase, even if we move to a steady state economy. So occasionally you might get a little bit of growth and a bit of increase in GDP, but that would be incidental or would be the offshoot of